that because it's quite a dense book. It's not that long, but it's filled with information for us to discuss. So, and Bob Flax knows Glen personally, the author of the book. And so he has volunteered to serve as the moderator for these sessions. So
Okay.
Bob, why don't you take it away? Let's see who else is.
Good. I guess that's my cue. So yes. So first of all, a happy New Year. Welcome to our next round of sessions of the World Citizen Cyber Book Club. As we were talking about a few minutes ago, we started off the year with some unanticipated excitement on our nation's capital. But since we still, have a country, I suppose we can proceed. So, so for those of you, I know there's at least one person who's new to the call. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Bob Flax, and I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions. The next book that we're going to start today is a departure from what we've been reading thus far. In that the how would I say that the people who have been involved in the in CGS, most of you, and our partner organizations probably know the least about. We kind of debuted Glen Martin at our convention, but it's not a particular path to World Federation and a model for it that we've spent a lot of time on, at least not in this organization. So
Brad,
before
did you know that another 737 just went down?
What?
No.
Did not know that.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Stay off of 737s. God.
And actually, thank you for speaking up, because that reminds me, if I could ask everyone to mute themselves when they're not speaking, so we don't hear the dogs barking and the kids crying and all that in the background. So, so before I go any further and kind of introduce the subject matter for this most recent book, I'll go over a few housekeeping matters. So first, as far as Zoom is concerned, I actually just mentioned the first one. If people would keep themselves on mute while we're not in question periods. And if you're on the phone, usually that works by hitting *6 to go on mute and then to go off mute. For those of you who are not as familiar with Zoom, you have a choice. If you want to see everybody who's on the call all at once, you go to something called Gallery View, which is often found on the upper right-hand portion of your screen. Or if you rather see just the speaker in their full glory and splendor, see them take up the full screen, then you go to Speaker View. And you have to bring your cursor to that corner for the word view to pop up, and then you could toggle between them, either gallery or speaker view. At the bottom of your screen, there is a button that's called chat. If you want to speak, if you want to comment on something that's going on, send a message to everybody or even a particular person, you can hit that button, a chat box will pop up, and then you could make your comment. We're not going to be officially monitoring the chat. So in order to get into the conversation, you'll need to raise your hand later when we get to the questions period. And we'll, explain how to do that when we get to that point. But if you're having technical problems, if you can't hear or something like that, please put that in the chat. I'll ask Gail if you can keep an eye on that to see if anyone has a technical issue. And we don't have a separate technical person who's working with us to monitor it. So we'll try to do what we can and, and take a brief moment to break from the action. But we don't have extensive troubleshooting capacity on the call. Speaking of troubleshooting, by now, probably most of you have heard of Zoom bombing. That's when someone who's not been invited to a call comes on and tries to either take over the screen or make lots of noise or do something to disrupt, what's going on. That has not happened with us very much. I believe it's happened once. So if someone comes on and we don't recognize their name or their phone number, we may just stop right there and ask them to identify themselves, so we don't have the whole proceedings jammed. So those are the kind of Zoom housekeeping matters. in terms of the overall kind of program and how we're facilitating today, in a moment, I'll give a short intro to both the subject matter and to Glen, our guest author for today. I'm still assuming he will show up. If not, he said he can come to a number of sessions. So if for some last minute emergency, he may not have been able to join us today, but he said he would be able to come to future sessions as well. So we can go ahead either way. So I'll give a brief introduction to the subject matter and to Glen. Then he will, if he's here, give up to a half-hour presentation, giving some background and covering the material that's in the introduction to the book, which we read and that was sent out as well, a PDF of that. Then we'll open it up to questions to Glen. Those questions could be either from what he just presented or from the book itself. And I want to, give priority to the questions to him. And then we'll just open it up for general conversation. At that point, he could come in if he wants to, but people may just have things that they want to share or insights they had from reading it or things they disagree with or whatever. So we'll move into that. And then about 5 minutes before closing time, and this is a 90-minute session, about 5 minutes before closing time, we'll wrap up. Gail will have a chance, Gail will come back on, wrap up the session, and we'll confirm the next meeting and make any announcements that need to be made. So that's the protocol. So with that, I'm thinking that I will pass on the introduction to Glen for a moment, and I'll do that if he shows up, or else I'll do that next time, that he's here. And I'll just jump to introducing the topic and explain that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a moment, and well, actually, before I do that, let me just ask Donna, did you hear back from Glen?
I did. No, I did. I sent him one message immediately, and then a minute ago, I followed up with a second. Arthur is suggesting, does anyone have a phone number for Glen? I don't. I would be happy to call if anybody could give me a number. But
okay. Does anyone have a phone number for Glen Martin? Okay, hearing none, we'll just have to rely on the
I think Ron Glossop went to look for one. I noticed Ron Glossop got up and walked away, so he might.
Terrific.
We'll see if he comes back.
Okay, great. I'll proceed and we'll see if if Ron comes with the number in hand. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over the introduction to him and introduce the topic instead. And if you were at the convention that we had in November, and where I introduced Glen, what I'm going to say will be familiar to you. So I'm going to push a button or two to share my screen, and then I will proceed. So first question, can everyone see that image of the mountain with 4 different paths? Or is there anyone who does not see that? Okay, great, good, thank you. Okay, so this is a graphic that a group at the Democratic World Federalists made about a decade ago. DWF is another one of the World Federalist organizations out there in the world. At the time, I was associated with them, and I was part of a team that tried to take all the literature on World Federation and try to kind of represent it in an easy to see way. And in the literature, they talked about 4 main paths. There are many, many, written proposals and books and things like that, but they seem to boil down into 4 main ways to get there. And we try to represent that with this image. I've since had further ideas and talk with other people about it. We're going to redo this and make it even more accurate. But in the meantime, I think this is a good way to kind of frame the whole literature. So starting on the left, that first sign of transforming the United Nations, that most of us in CGS and most of our partner organizations have been, you could say, on that path. On that right now are a number of people you may be familiar with. Andreas Bummel with the UNPA. That's essentially a 3-step plan that he has to move the UN from the UN it is today to a world federation. Joe Schwartzberg, whose book, I have it right here, Transforming the United Nations System, Designs for a Workable World. That's the first book that we read in the book club. He's on that path. He has his own model for how to work with the UN. And then Shahryar Sharif from the, the Center for UN Constitutional Research in Brussels, who's presented to us a number of times. He's on that path, has a way to use the UN Charter to go through a charter review process to transform the UN into a world federation. So there's a lot of energy there. And a lot of people say, you know, that the UN is what we have to work with it, we can't ignore it, we have to go that route. So I would say my own estimation is probably the most energy and the most organizations are there. Okay. However, there are quite a few people who say that the UN is so hopelessly broken, so compromised, so caught in bureaucracy, you know, et cetera, that it's hopeless, that you really, you know, anything that really is substance that can be done has to be done outside of the UN, like, you know, the ICC, the G20. I mean, many things have happened outside of the UN because people feel it's just stuck in bureaucracy. So the three other paths essentially share that philosophy, share that perspective. So the next one there, integrate the regions, what they basically say is, hey, getting to a world federation is a two-step process. First of all, what you've got to do is integrate the regions. So first you get the European Union, you know, to get their act together, the African Union, the Caribbean and Latin American Union, et cetera, et cetera. And then once those are federated, then it's a natural step to then just and essentially connect the dots and make a world federation. And those people argue that this is kind of the natural evolution that's happening already. We don't have to push this much. We could help facilitate it. We can help move it along. But this is, they argue, this is actually what's happening in the world. So this is the way to get to a world federation. So there's that camp. Okay? Then a third group of people and books and all that kind of have a similar idea, but they say rather than doing this geographically, that what we should do is unite the democracies and get the advanced democracies of the world to come together and become a world federation. And in fact, you know, the democracies, or at least those in name, have done a number of things together, like create NATO, you know, and create other alliances. So the idea is to use that same, you know, that same thrust essentially, and to unite them into a federation. So that's, in a sense, that camp. Now, what all of those agree on, even though they disagree sometimes vehemently about the paths, what they all seem to agree on is when you get to the top of the mountain, essentially, you create a constitution. And essentially, that's kind of the last step of each of those. And most of them agree. You create a world parliament, you have some type of global bill of rights. That's what's at the top of the mountain. Okay. But then there's this other group that say, that essentially, you know, spin that on its head. And they say instead, no. The idea is to create the Constitution first, to get that up, you know, to get that articulated. And then what you do is you approach the different nations and the people of the world, and you essentially try to get it ratified. Just like what happened in the United States, they say, that you had a small group of, you know, elite landowners and whatever that created a, you know, our US Constitution. And then they went and tried to sell it to the states and get it ratified on a state level. So that's their argument. And they say that, and further, what they say is that the main problem with the other routes, they say, is the world doesn't have enough time. That to wait to go through to get all the regions up and running, to pull the demand. It's just, it will be dead by then, given the environment, give other, given all of the contingencies out there, that we have to kind of leapfrog this and actually articulate the Constitution. So there have been, if you've read the first chapter, there have been about 150 constitutions written for the earth. I'm sure some of them were just on the backs of napkins with a couple of people at a restaurant talking, but there are about half a dozen of them that are really substantive. And there are substantive books written by the people who thought them through and all that. And there are other books comparing the different constitutions. So there are several out there. That is actually a path people have taken. But out of those several constitutions, there's only one group out of all of them that have actually tried to get it ratified, that have gone around to different nations and approached them and tried to see if the nations would sign on to this. And that group is called the World Constitution and Parliament Association, of which Glen Martin is now the head of. If you read the first chapter, or the first section rather, the introduction, you see he's not the founder of it. He came on later, but he has inherited the organization and he is now the head of it. So with that, well, first I'll stop while the image is on. And now let me see if I can make sure. Okay, I can't, as long as I am sharing my screen and have the image up, I can't see all of you at the same time. So if anyone has a question or comment just about what I said so far, you'll have to call out your name. I apologize, but I do not, I just can't see anybody, everybody all at once. So if you have a
Or
question,
if people raise their cyber hands, I can see those. I
you
can't
can.
see everybody either. I can see their cyber hands.
Oh, great.
I
So
can't see it.
can you call on folks?
Sure,
then-
and I'll
Great.
I can scroll around looking for if anybody's physical hand is raised, but,
Great.
oh, David Gallup's hand is up.
And I see Ron's as well.
David Gallup,
Yeah. let's
okay.
So, so I would just add, it's already on the map here, World Citizen Movement, but I would really add that as a fifth route towards World Federation. And that would be sort of what Gary Davis did, which was to say, let's go to the people and have the people, and Glenn refers to this in his book a couple times, actually, in the first chapter, about going to the people and saying, well, let's come together in how we see ourselves with our identity. And once we see ourselves as one human family, as world citizens with rights and duties, then we can go on and build the institutions that will affirm that. So, I mean, as you're redoing this map, so to speak, I would say, instead of leaving that off as a related activity, I would add it as maybe a fifth way, instead of, going to the power brokers that sort of exist already, whether that's at the UN, in the regions, or the current democracies, or building a separate constitution, trying to go to the people first. That's how I would distinguish it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Dave. Yes. When I talked about revising it, there's at least one or two more routes that I would add now, a decade after this was done, and that's certainly one of them. I'll just repeat something that David said to me a while ago, maybe 5 years ago or so, that really stuck with me. That Gary's idea was, before you build the structures, you first have to get the constituency. Who are the people that will be the world citizens, and then they could build the structures. All of these approaches that you see essentially are structural approaches that try to build the structures first. So Gary's uniqueness was doing it the other way around, getting the constituency first. So thank you, David, for bringing that up. Who's next up?
Ron Glossop is next, and then after that, Barrett.
Great.
I would like to say that I also know Glen Martin. And in fact, I had a chance to be with him and work with him in an organization called Concerned Philosophers for Peace. I like to think that I had at least something to do with the fact that Glenn has become interested in the idea of World Federation. And if I'm not mistaken, he even attended a meeting of the World Federalist Association in Denver, Colorado. He just came one time, but he came there, I think, to explore what was going on. And I believe that an important part of his view is that the problem with the United Nations is that it's controlled by the national governments, and they're the problem. And so it's, you can hardly move forward when your antagonists are in charge of the UN.
Thank you, Ron. Donna, who did you say was next?
Barrett?
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Well, just following up on David's suggestion, I was just remembering, I just read in the New York Times that the people who were there at the Capitol on Wednesday, they all came together through internet communications, which occurred several months ago. So if you can bring all these people together through internet, maybe internet would be a good way to connect to people right away and propagate this. And I also read that Mr. Trump has 88 million followers of his account, you know, the
Twitter, his Twitter account that's now
Yeah.
shut down, that one?
the one that he's been banned on now, you know.
Yeah.
And so if one could create that kind of a large relationship over a relatively short period, I suppose if we have a campaign, we might create something like that on the internet and take this fifth way, thanks to Gary Davis and his ideas, and move towards a world federation. That's just my comment.
Yeah. Well, Barrett, I want to underscore what you said. You may not know this, but your ESP may be very, very highly attuned, because that is another way that a lot of people are talking about right now, mostly younger people, that most of the literature in the past has looked at kind of old style parliaments, you know, with representative governments and all that. But there's a lot of talk about getting some type of global governance structure via the internet and looking at different ways of democratizing, you know, raising democracy to that level through the internet. So so there's a lot of thinking going on right now about that, using Bitcoin technology and things of that sort. I personally, maybe someone else has seen like a book or an actual proposal. I don't know that they're there yet, but there's a lot of exploratory thinking about that. So yes, so that's either, you know, either you can call that a path or people that are formulating a path around that, but there's definitely a lot of interest there. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
So any other questions or comments before I take the image down and we go, okay, I do
Yes,
see.
Arthur Canigis raised his hand, and David Otten raised his hand, and Gail Hughes raised her hand.
Okay.
And Father
Yeah.
Ben. And Father Ben.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Okay. Glad you
So
brought up.
Arthur, go ahead.
No, okay. Glad you brought up that issue of kind of bottom-up democracy. The Global Challenge Foundation, you know, had that multi-million-dollar prize, and one of the winners, Sushiant, had this proposal for how you can use AI to amalgamate the will of the people. And I had a proposal along that lines that I submitted there too. And we also, of course, on our People Powered Planet podcast are exploring that. We have Glen Martin coming on to speak, and we have the head of Rotary International for the whole world. I'm hoping that he and Glen connected about how we can get him more involved. But the other, but I think the key thing is that all these Zoom meetings that are happening all over the world present an incredible model for what Gary called integrity groups, which is you have small groups meeting who, instead of just a free-for-all discussion, they've got kind of a guideline of steps and principles to work for coming for common ground. And you specifically, the more you have people from opposite sides of a political issue, you get Arabs and Palestinians together, you know, Republicans and Democrats, or any group across the world. And the more diverse the group and the more you can then use these interactive tools to come to a consensus, the more weight in the algorithm that conclusion has, because it's drawn people together. And the difference is it's not win-lose, who votes for who or who votes for another person, but you're reaching a common goal. What is the solution to this problem? It's a solutionary approach. And you have at your tools in this kind of Zoom kind of conference, you have, you know, examples of all the best, what's worked and what hasn't, and more objective data to try to get through this information and let people really in an interactive way understand the reality of issues and come to ideas of, they're drawing each person's ideas for how do we make things better, and then amalgamate those into the will of the people globally. And it seems to me, you know, that's the direction the world is going. You look at something like Facebook that's taken off with multi-billion members, and because it helped connect people, well, how much more powerful might be an app that not only connects people, but empowers them to solve problems in their communities, in their neighborhood, and draws all the best resources and helps them resolve conflicts. If we can invent kind of and work with some of the top Silicon Valley people and invent kind of a tool, interactive tool, that's so valuable, everybody wants to hop on it because it helps them solve their problem in their homeowners association or with their neighbor or in their city, state, because it helps bring together common ground and come to solutions that work. I think we could create something that could be as powerful and could take off, you know, with more than 1 billion people. But it would have to be a really powerful tool, and it would have to be promoted in media and films, and people have to get the idea of it. But it's already beginning to emerge as we have these Zoom conferences, and we're seeing people from all over the world interacting with each other. So that's my thought on carrying out Gary's what's called the people-powered planet.
Great. Thank you, Arthur. And let me say before we go on to the next person, since obviously we're breaking from the plan protocol, since Glenn, it looks like, is not showing up then. I was going to mention one other facilitation item when we got to the questions and the discussion. So let me mention that now, which is we want to get as many people as we can in. So if both Donna and Gail, we just kind of keep a look at the time. So if people could limit their questions or their comments to, let's say, about 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll let you know when it's coming up on that time, just to be able to get everybody in. So we have a few more people in line. Then what I want to do is take down this image, go back to the regular screen sharing so we could all see each other, and then look at the first, the introductory section of the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth. So who is next?
Dave Otten.
Related to these different pathways, including creating a world constitution. In addition to what Arthur just mentioned, social media, which I think should go around the sun along because it's related to education and raising consciousness, we shouldn't forget the importance of religion and ethics in the world in motivating people to become world citizens, to think of our global problems and our common family, and also the role that religion and ethics can play in motivating people to ratify a world constitution.
Thank you, David.
Gail Hughes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, on your chart, Bob, there's the World Citizens Movement. Is that the same, would you say, as the World Citizen Path that David Gallup mentioned?
Yes, yes. The idea here, again, this is like a decade ago that we put this together. But what we were trying to do is kind of, well, our understanding at the time was more focused on the structures, as I said before, that these all have kind of structures for how to get there and whatever. The world, for the half a dozen of us or so that were looking at this, viewed the the world, Gary Davis and what he was doing as more something related, that the World Citizens Movement was parallel and related to the World Federalist Movement. But as David Gallup enlightened me, that actually Gary was going in the same direction, but it was just another path.
So in other words, it was, is it an activity or is it a path?
Well, I mean, that's kind of how you want to label things. But these days, I would put it, if you're asking me personally, this is not a CGS official statement. But these days, if I were redoing it, I would make that a fifth path.
Okay, thanks for
Yeah.
the clarification.
Sure. And let me actually, since we're talking about modifying the chart, and I really appreciate this because the input is good. One other modification that I got from both Andreas Bummel and I think Glen Martin mentioned it also, is as you look at this chart, the paths are pretty separate, right till the end. I mean, there are two that look like they coincide near the top. But what Andreas was the first one to point out to me is that there's actually a lot of interaction all along the way. People are coming to each other's conferences, getting ideas from each other. It might be that in terms of the whole world, that a particular path and the organizations on it might make some headway. And then just like at a basketball court, you throw the ball to another group and they move it further, and then you throw it to another, they move it further. So Andreas was the first one to point out the real interaction between them, and that it might actually be the synergy of all of these groups and different approaches pushing, and different ones may appeal to different people. So imagine, for example, if there were, a couple of 100,000 people in each of those, and thinking, and the world shifted from thinking about, just the way it, from going to never even having heard of a World Federation to thinking of, oh yes, of course, that's what we need, and debating the best way to get there. I mean, just imagine the shift in humanity that would do. So anyhow, so what will, the next image will likely have a lot of intersections and a lot of, rather than looking at them as very separate paths. They may have started out that way, but over the last 75 years, there's been a lot of interaction and a lot of learning from each other. So who else is next in the line?
Father Ben, can you lower your camera so we can see you? Do you still want to talk? I saw your hand, I thought. Ben, are you there?
Are you talking to me, Ben?
Yes. Yes. Did you read? Yes, Father Ben. Did you had your hand raised? Did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. I have a brother who has spent his adult life in the entertainment business on Broadway in Las Vegas and so on. And we talked once about, and he knows people who deal with advertisements.
I'm sorry, Father Ben, sorry for interrupting. If you could lean in more toward your microphone, we can hear you better. It's very hard to hear you.
I just want to say that I think there's a great deal of success in television during commercials that we maybe would tend to downplay commercials, but in discussions about the effectiveness of the television, I would say that my brother would emphasize that companies spend most of their time on commercials rather than on serious topics. And we should not neglect the success and lack of success of commercials.
Great, thank you. Yes, we certainly need to be a lot better about how we promote our work. And many of the World Federalist organizations right now are looking at that, how to actually do marketing better. So hopefully we will get better at that. But I want to, again, if as soon as we can, switch over from comparing the different paths to taking the deep dive in to the Constitution. So anything else, any other people online there in terms of the comparisons between the paths? And then we'll go look at the Constitution.
Arthur just raised his hand again.
Okay.
Arthur, did you raise your hand on purpose?
To pitch in, yeah, no, I wanted to just briefly say on Ben's idea there that I think it's so important to reach a broad audience, but I think more than just commercials. I mean, my big idea is to develop an ongoing like television series where every week young people dwell in the kind of future we're envisioning. And I think the Pope's latest encyclical was so dramatic and kind of leading in this direction. Maybe that's a key to try to get some larger forces mobilized to help create, kind of a media show where this becomes a common part of people's experience. I mean, so many people got into this movement originally with even with Star Trek, and I think if we move to something that's Earth-based, a future Earth that works, not just all the different aliens, that's such a ongoing series that could really help lift the vision of people.
Great. Thank you, Arthur. And with that, I will take down the image. I think people have it, emblazed in their mind enough at this point. So let me stop sharing that and turn to the introduction itself. So I know I had I had 3 questions for Glenn and a comment. I'm sure other people had things as well. So I'd like to take a cue, and I could do that now that I'm that I could see everybody's face and the image is down. So if there's anything that anyone wants to say or ask, obviously now we'd be asking the group and getting their feedback and opinions from the reading. The first chapter, in case or the introduction, I should say, was sent out. We sent out a PDF for that to make it easier to get, if you're waiting for the book. So that's in the mailings, but I'll take a show of hands if anybody has any questions or comments about that first section. I see Lee first. Anybody next in the queue? Okay, I see Donna and then David Gallup. Okay, we'll stop there. We'll start with Lee and then we'll take another queue after that. So Lee, take it away.
Lee, you're on mute.
Okay. In Section 8, there's the discussion of the 2 organizations that give out World Citizen Identity Cards. I could have sent this to David, but we share it with you all. There's the World Citizens Registry and the World Service Authority. Do these 2 groups interact? Do they share cards? What is the story about the 2 different organizations that seem to do some of the same things?
Great.
Want me to answer that?
Sure. And since you were in line anyway, why don't you do the answer to your question, then I'll go to Donna next.
Okay, sure. So, yeah, I mean, Gary Davis, along with some of the well-known French intellectuals, had created the registry in Paris in 1949. Then Gary, as he started traveling, as we read in My Country is the World, left that to a group of people, René and Guy Marchand in Paris in particular, who kept running that. And then after Gary realized that just registering people was not enough, that we should have a government of, by, and for the people of the world. Then he created the World Citizen Government and the World Service Authority, which also started registering people as world citizens, as well as providing the panoply of other documents that we continue to issue. So the registry still issues a world citizen card or ID. We at World Service Authority also issue a world citizen card and certificate. I mean, from my perspective, the registry has sort of kept it on a symbolic level, whereas at World Service Authority, we have a legal advocacy team that actually backs up the legal validity of the documents. So when someone shows it, or if they're having difficulty in showing it, we would come to their aid through a legal letter, an amicus brief, or something like that to support their identity as a world citizen legally, politically, and officially. So that's sort of the difference. But both organizations still exist. We haven't ever really, since the late 40s, early 50s, continued to work together, partly due to the fact that I think the registry thinks, of course, just like Gary did initially, that we have to build the constituency first, and then we'll create the government. And then Gary at one point said, no, we just need to found this government and then still continue to build the constituency. So we've made attempts to work together in the past 10 years, but with full disclosure, I think their biggest concern is the world passport and the fact that it's not always recognized. So they don't necessarily want to be affiliated with that aspect of it, where we know, though, that has been a help to a lot of people. So anyway, that, Lee, I think if that's enough, that will explain that. And then, so my comment sort of relates to still to Gary and that on page 13, Glen does mention Gary and the World Citizenship Movement, which was so delighted to see that. I just wanted to clarify that Gary never tore up his US passport, which is sort of a common myth that gets repeated by the press and other people. As you read in My Country is the World, he actually handed in his US passport to the US embassy in Paris. So that didn't happen. There were other things, like he tore up plane tickets. He tore up like a carte de séjour, a residency card that he got from the French government, but he never tore up his passport. And he didn't call himself world citizen number one. That was the media, the press, who called him that. But what I was also, so those were just a couple, edits or corrections that I would make to the book. And then the very last thing, though, is I was delighted to see in the very last section, in section 8, where he refers back to Gary. And I think, once again, the reason why I'm involved with Citizens for Global Solutions is to bring in this idea of world citizenship and link that to World Federation or democratic world government. So that was really just my other comment.
Great. Thank you, David. I see Donna, and then as we were talking, both Lynn and Arthur are on the next round of the queue. So, okay, I see Gail coming in as well. So, okay, so Donna, take it away.
Okay, my question or comments are on the bottom, or in the middle of page 16, at the bottom of the second paragraph on that page, where he says, does the future of the world lie entirely in the hands of illegitimate sovereign national entities militarizing the world and creating ever more weapons of death and destruction? Or do citizens of the earth have the right and duty to take charge in creating a decent world order for themselves and future generations? So other than the word illegitimate sovereign nations, I don't know that that's exactly accurate, but I guess I just want to point out that I feel like the current roadmap that Citizens for Global Solutions has suggests perhaps a third route. Is that what we're trying to do is to build up political will to then change the people in the governments. So it's kind of like, to me, it seems like a third option there of trying to recognize, that we need to address those leaders of the government, legitimate or illegitimate, and try to get them to change their minds too. I don't know. Anyway, so that maybe, Bob, you could comment on how you see this fitting in with our roadmap. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, your question makes sense. I'll put myself in the queue. I have a few other things I want to say as well, so I'll put myself in after the next round. So thank you, Donna. So the next round we have Lynn, Arthur, and Gail. Lynn, take it away. And you have to go off mute.
I know. Yeah. So we dropped the atomic bombs, right? We did it, you know? So we've been kind of leveraging ourselves on that, I think, up until Wednesday, when we're proven to be the banana republic that we actually are. You know, people like to look up to somebody bigger, you know, but that's not a deal anymore, you know, and we don't need atomic bombs anymore. We don't need even guns, or I'm opposed to any firearms of any type, you know, but we're now at this interesting tipping point internationally with our government being shown the emperor without any clothes. So it's a perfect opportunity for citizens of World Solutions of this group to move in and take over what we already had in the first place. So it's a grand opportunity, and I think something ought to be done.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. And Arthur, you're next in queue.
Okay, yes.
And
I was
also
just
one
gonna-
other thing,
Oh,
one
please.
other thing is, and this is a huge one, that's the virus now. And you have to connect those two things up somehow, because we have like an issue of the imminence of our survival implicated in this thing now. So it's like, don't lose any time.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Arthur?
Yes.
No problem.
Yes, well, very good point. I think we have terrific opportunity for a change right now, not only because of what's happening in the world, but in addition to the two groups that started these registries, now, just like cyber currencies have taken away the idea that only governments can issue money, so there are numerous groups now working on digital IDs. I just posted one example in the site, but there are others that I think could collaborate with David and the World Service Authority. And if we can get them working together, and if the World Passport can have a special secure digital component that uses kind of blockchain type technology, or even holochain, a new thing advanced over that that's more ecological, there may be ways this can really leap forward, just as cyber currencies were first tried to be suppressed by governments, but then they leapt beyond it. And I think the same could happen as digital IDs become crucial for the billion people with no identity in the world.
Great. Thank you, Arthur. And Gail.
I have 3 points. One is a small one, and that is on page 4. He mentions that even though human beings have been widely aware of the democratic idea since the 18th century, I would say that there have been democratic processes probably among hunters and gatherers, much earlier. And that points to me to the importance of situation and structures, as far as what is possible, or, because nation states didn't come out just for no reason, but it had to do with the whole, the population and that kind of thing. Then secondly, on page 6, he makes an interesting point that he claims, he said that sovereign nation states were formulated in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. So in other words, the nation state is really not all that old. It isn't that old in the history of the world. It doesn't, that indicates that, it isn't something inherent in human nature that we must have nation states. And below that, he says, under the present system of sovereign nation states, the best that a supranational organization can do is to create a confederation of nations. So I think that challenges, our assumption that seemed to be an operational assumption that we want a world federation, but we don't want to do away with the nation state. And he's implying that, well, that might not be possible. So I found that interesting. And then the third thing is that on page 24, he talks about direct participation in the electoral processes of the House of Peoples. That is possible now because of the advance of technology. And that's something that we've alluded to from time to time, but we haven't really thought about the implications of that. The structures that we're considering need to take into account that it is possible to have not just representation, but direct democracy, perhaps. Anyway, those were the things that struck me.
Great, thank you, Gail. Okay, I put myself next in the queue, but before I start, are there any other people who want to get in after me then? Okay, I'll check again when I'm done. Okay, Tom Hastings, I'll put you in next. So, yeah, so I had 3 questions for Glenn, and then in listening to all the conversations, I had 3 other things that got triggered. So not to monopolize, I'll hold my questions for Glenn for a future round, but I do want to respond to a couple of things that, that got triggered from folks talking. So the first thing is, I think Lynn's great observation when she mentioned that, with the kind of disruption and showing the emperor has no clothes, why don't we move in right now, And one of what that reminded me of is, some of you may be familiar with the progressive thinker Naomi Klein. She got, she kind of went to fame with her book, The Shock Doctrine, although she wrote 1 or 2 things before that. Just a brilliant, expansive thinker, Canadian living in the US, I believe at this point. And what she says in The Shock Doctrine is that often there are ideas that are just, quote, laying around, and they're not accepted, but they're laying around. But when there's some shock, some upheaval, something that goes on, that the people who have these ideas ready kind of rush them in. And the big example she gives is 9/11, that the Patriot Act and the thinking around that was there forever. I mean, you can find it on the website from before. There were all kinds of documents about the new American century and, how we'll be, the dominant force in the world after Russia's out of the way and this and that. And, people, that was not the zeitgeist. People were not accepting that. And all of a sudden, a shock, 9/11. And as people were kind of in shock and awe, whatever, that got rushed in by those people. And we see the results of that, what's happened over the last, the years that have followed. So one of the things I know that World Federalists have talked about is that we need to be ready for the next shock, that it would be great. Remember, it took World War I to bring about the League of Nations, World War II to bring about the UN. And it would be great if we can head it off at the pass and not have another war or an environmental cataclysm or whatever. But if we can't, that we need to be ready, that if something happens, because we know that all of the pundits are going to jump in and they're going to have their things, and probably mostly they're going to be nationalistic solutions, a lot of them. So we need to be ready with our proposals so we're there on the world stage. God forbid it happens, but should there be another shock? So, and I've been on other conference calls where people were waiting, World Federalists were waiting to see, will the pandemic do that? Will this be the shock that brings the world together? And I will say a number of them, some of you are familiar, oh God, I'm forgetting the classic 2-volume work on World Federation. Oh geez, I'm blanking on his name right now. The whole history of it, whatever, the most thorough books on it. He was saying with despair that I don't think the pandemic is bad enough to be that shock to bring the world to the next level. So so something to think about. And I want to thank Lynn for triggering that thought.
Maybe
Sec-
that combined with climate change,
Maybe.
the two
maybe.
together.
I'm thinking climate change actually is going to be it. But because they're not going to be able to cure that with a vaccine. So but personally, I'm thinking there, but that's not an official CGS position. Second thing, something that many of you know who Van Jones is. He worked as the, under the Obama administration and as a, political pundit now on CNN and other places. And he said something the other day that I thought was just wonderful and poetic and all that. And it's been said before, but he just said it, he captured it in better poetry than I can recreate right now. And he said basically, if you go up into space and look at the Earth, you don't see all the divisions, you don't see all that, you just see one humanity. So what is it that happens on the Earth that makes it different? And what it is our stories. The United States is a story. The nation states are stories or collections of stories. And what we really need to do is we need to shift those stories and have the world telling better stories that are more adaptive and more beneficial to the planet. So I was just very moved by that, and I just wanted to share that. The last thing that I'll say is that got triggered by something that Gail said when she talked about the sovereignty issue. And I think I forgot who I heard say this, but I'll repeat it from wherever it was, that someone once said that sovereignty is not the problem. It's absolute sovereignty is what is the problem. That when the United States went from not the United States, when the Confederation of States, the 13 of them, went from a confederation to a federation, they didn't give up all sovereignty. The states still have a lot, okay? But what they did is they gave up absolute sovereignty, and there was an amount now of shared sovereignty that they all have together. And I thought that was a very astute distinction. That the problem isn't sovereignty, it's absolute sovereignty that's the problem, or that's causing all the problems. So with that, I'll leave it. I'll come around later and talk about my questions for Glenn. But Tom, you are next.
When I about 15 years ago, I was working with some people from Switzerland and working on standards, and the Swiss representative said every 2 weeks he goes and votes on the federation of that Switzerland is. And so that's an example of direct democracy that's been happening over in Switzerland. I wonder if anyone else knew about that and whether it's still happening. We ought to look into that as an example of
Exactly. What is it exactly?
Thank you.
What is it
every
exactly?
2 weeks, people could go and vote on Swiss government issues, because Switzerland is a federation of cantons, and they have it's almost as old as the United States, but we don't seem to recognize that it's an example of a country federation that's working, and they have direct democracy is mixed in with it.
Yes, they
Wow.
have. I mean, in the American legal system, we would say they have an ongoing series of referendums constantly. California does that. Some places do that every several years.
Right.
But that's an example of a place that has that constantly.
Every 2 weeks.
So
That's agile,
What's
completely agile. It's real time,
Yes, yeah.
real time government.
I
And that's
want to ask people, just so that we don't break down, I want to ask people to raise their hand and get in the queue. So Tom, are you complete?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that completes the queue up to this point. I'll take further hands, especially anyone who hasn't spoken that much. Okay, I see Ron. Anybody after Ron? Okay, I'll take Bharat and then Donna. Okay, Ron, take it away.
I do want to mention, as I usually do, the language issue. We are getting a situation where most of the people, or I shouldn't say most, many people in the world now can use English, but there's still a huge percentage of people that can't. And so we have to think, you know, it's not just national sovereignty, it's also national languages that are an important part of our identification. And I will say the World Constitution and Parliament Association has been particularly sensitive to that, and they use the official languages of the UN plus Esperanto. They publish everything in Esperanto, as well as 6 other national languages.
Cool. Thank you, Ron. Okay, got and Bharat, sorry if I butcher your name. I seem to oscillate between Barrett and Bharat. So feel free to correct me if I go the wrong direction. But please you need to go off mute.
Well, my name is Bharat.
Bharat. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing that concerns me, I don't know exactly how we incorporate it, but it seems to me our world is, as it's developing in our species, is breaking down into haves and have-not. And the have-nots are growing at much faster rate than the haves. And to me, only way we can improve those is through the grassroots. Most of the things we're talking about are from the top down. And I personally feel, at least in the context of what I'm trying to do in my own projects, we're trying to end childhood malnutrition. I mean, that's something which is in the realm of those who are poor. Although now the rich are beginning to have malnutrition as well, and that is of overnutrition as opposed to undernutrition. They're becoming obese, they're becoming diabetic, they're having heart attacks. And so health-wise, there is some kind of a justice in that the rich and the poor are suffering the same kinds of maladies. And so the question I have is there any kind of formulation that has been made that in fact takes into account a world coming together which will also take care of making life better? That to me is a very important question that needs to, and that's one way I think we could win people's allegiance to this. I'm reminded of many stories in the history of India of, you know, terrible kings and very loved kings that occurred, where in fact the ones that were liked were the ones who cared for the poor and distributed, you know, and took care of it and make sure the community was happy, and spend time asking them in their courts, you know, what their problems were. So, you know, in a way, Pope is like that, you know, the father to everyone. And so I'm kind of thinking somehow faith, religion, and caring, it should all be incorporated in some kind of a construct in the formulation. You know, is there anything like that? I don't know. That's my concern and a question, if you can call it a question.
Great. Thank you. I have Donna next, and then I've already got the next queue, Lynn, Arthur, and Carla, and then I'll put myself in for the one after that. So go ahead, Donna.
I'd like to say in response to Barrett's great comment that on page 23 of the introduction, Glen Martin says that the Constitution, that one of its scopes is to promote prosperity and decent economic standards for all persons. So I'm looking forward to reading how that comes into the Constitution. So that was one thing that really caught me, because I agree with you. And I know Father Ben's vision of hope says, if we've got to deal with the economic inequities if we're ever going to have true peace and justice. My question that I would ask Glenn or anyone. So I think this is fabulous work. I think I read it a while ago when I first joined the movement, because I was trying to get a sense of how would this work. And so I don't know if this is the one I read or something like it, but I do know that when I speak in front of people and I talk about the multiple paths, I will say that there's some great work that can be the foundational work for a constitution when we're there, or as we're moving forward. I feel like there is an important sort of philosophical question about, how much we consider, like, it seems to me like they're considering this done and asking people to sign off on it. And it seems to me that it maybe, to use Lynn's word, it maybe needs to be more agile. Like, maybe people should say, well, this is a good starting point, and I don't know. So it's kind of, that would be my question of sort of how to frame this. Is it, and maybe it's even the question that Gail asked about the world citizen movement. Is it a path or is it a tactic? One could say that about this too. Is this a path or is this a step that you need along the way? I don't know. Anyway, okay, that's my rambling. Thank you for putting up with me.
Thank you, Don. So we have next Lynn, Arthur, and then Carla. So Lynn, take it away. And you have to go off mute, Lynn.
The best model that I can think of right now for this is what we're doing with the virus. And for example, the 50% dosage that they were referring to in the UK for kids, because to get it out to enough people in time, we can give it half doses, and then the other thing is, well, if you delay the booster shot, the second one for 3 months or whatever, you'll get out enough of the antidote that will survive. It's this basic survival that's happening now on the level of a global lab experiment, right? So if anything, Citizens for Global Solutions could look at this and go, there's a lot of possibilities happening here right now. And if we want to save ourselves, we need to be very innovative and like I said, agile, and enact that in our system. And through the Citizens for Global Solutions, to be able to do this, there's no better group that's positioned to do something, right? For survival. That Ron Forthover from Boulder always said, when we all do better, we all do better. I appreciated what you've said about that. And now the virus is telling us that. We're all going to be toast if we don't figure out how to deploy this vaccine to the most people in the most time without having researched it to death first. We don't have that benefit of 10 years of studying a vaccine to make it work right. We have to do it on the fly. And guess what? We can do. Done.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Arthur and then Carla. Go ahead, Arthur. Arthur, you're still on mute.
Here we go. Okay. I agree with with Lynn and especially with Donna about being innovative and agile, and that Constitution, that was one of the things I was looking forward to engaging more with Martin about, and do look forward to engaging with him, is on evolving it to have more currency to this whole interactive cyber age with all the Zooms and everything we're doing. But I think it is a fantastic document, incredible step forward, amazing amount of thinking that went into it and collaboration. And I think it's a very important document. And Glenn, since you've missed him here, he is going to be our speaker on our People Powered Planet podcast, January 20th. And he's going to be, he's following this week's speaker on Wednesday, which is Ford Roosevelt, also on a very relevant topic, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Ford is the grandson of Eleanor Roosevelt, and he's going to be talking about how do we move forward and implement human rights in this era. So, and I put in the chat how you come to us at People Powered Planet, and scroll down. But then right after him, we have an even more terrific way to start expanding our outreach, because the head of Rotary International for the whole
Arthur,
world.
we have 15 minutes left and a number of people who want to go
Great.
in. I want to stay focused on the Constitution. Thank you.
Great. Okay, move on. I put in the chat.
So, thank you so much. Okay, Carla?
I'd like to build a bit on Bharat's insight and just remind everybody that in the ecological and in the climate change camp, there's a tremendous amount of interest in diet and in wellness, the entire wellness movement, instead of just coping with starches and whatever to feed your face and to continue the obesity climb. There's an entire realm of medicine that is poo-pooed by many people in the American Medical Association. The American Medical Association focuses on types of chemistry as a solution for illness. There is tremendous amount of work that is very much undercover in preventative medicine. And I'll give just one quick example regarding the virus. Everyone is on the bandwagon for the vaccine, but the alternative wellness people for months have been encouraging everyone to double their vitamin D3 and try and continue to take 50 milligrams of zinc, because vitamin D, working with your cholesterol, prevents any virus from attaching to a human cell. And if it does attach, zinc prevents it from duplicating.
Carla, you just went on mute by accident. You just went on mute. Up.
We need both of these, American Medical Association and the preventative group that takes care of the house before the fire starts.
Great. Thank you, Carla. Okay, I have myself in the queue. First, let me check, is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet at all, or maybe just once, who wants to get a word in before we wrap up? We have less than 10 minutes before we got to begin winding up. So anyone who hasn't spoken at all, or perhaps just once? Okay, great. So then I have myself, I have Lynn, and then,
Okay, Bob.
okay, so I have Simon.
Response to Carla.
Lynn, I need to facilitate this in the way that we have it set up. So okay, so Simon, I'll let you go next. Then I'm in the queue, and then we'll have Lynn have the last word. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I really enjoyed very much all the useful comments by everybody in this meeting, and particularly as a doctor and a scientist, I think the vaccine story is very adept for our consideration. By trial and error, we can make progress. In other words, we can learn very quickly rather than wait for many years. So that means that we have to use our expertise by having different experts coming together in our group, for example, and other groups so that we can collaborate with each other in order to get the best minds and how to proceed. And the other thing is that we should use the world's people as our guests, the guests we take care of when they come to visit our home. You know, we are prepared for them, and see how we can satisfy their needs. So we have to be hosts to the guests we are working to satisfy and please their needs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Okay, I have, as I said, a few questions that I was going to ask Glenn, but I will share that with the group and I will bring it up to him in the future. But I will answer one question that was raised before. I think Donna was pointing to it, which I had asked Glenn in the past, which is you know, this document, you know, is it kind of a model for what could be, or is it a finished product? And I've gone to two different meetings with their organization, one in India and one in California, and had a few conversations with Glenn. So I kind of got to probe that. And here's what he said, and he may say something different, you know, tomorrow. But the organization WCPA, you know, their organizational position is the Constitution is complete, and now they're working on amendments, you know, like any constitution. It's not something that's static and set in stone forever, that they have provisional parliament sessions every several years in different places of the world, and people could bring amendments and they vote on them like anything else. So that's their official position. They're working on amendments. They've also printed money. I have an Earth dollar. I don't have it here to show you, and I have it in the closet, but they've begun doing things like any government would do, and they're acting as though they are a provisional government. So, and they're shopping around their constitution to have other governments adopt it. So that's the official position. When I've spoken to Glenn personally and seen some of his writings, he readily says that, you know, if the world ever comes to this point, if there were a UN Charter review, he hopes that they look at this as an example and get ideas from it, et cetera, et cetera. He personally isn't, I mean, my sense of him is he's very humble and very in reality, you know, rather than having some delusion that this will definitely be adopted, period, no conversation. You know, there are some very fervent followers of this movement that do feel that way. And I have an issue with them. But nevertheless, as I imagine you'll see in the, you know, the sessions that come, that Glenn himself is very in the real world about this. So I just wanted to share that. The questions I was going to ask him is on page, I mean, basically from what I gather, their strategy is two steps. First, create the Constitution and then sell it. You know, shop it around to the different nations and see if they adopt it. Okay. Now, what he says in the introduction, and on page 17, that they were doing well with that. There was a lot of interest, particularly in the global South, and then some of the superpowers. And I heard some of the backstory that there was going to be a group, a meeting, I think a Congress in Libya or something years ago, while Gaddafi was still in power. He invited a session of them. And at the last minute, all the passports of the people going there got canceled. And it looked like through word of mouth, the US did that. And then there were other things where a number of the superpowers kind of jumped in and essentially, oh, Glenn is here.
I apologize. I had 1:30 on my, for somehow in my book, and I got on at 1:30, but I guess I got it wrong.
Well, you came in time to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Let me first introduce everybody. This is Glenn Martin. You know, we have a series of other meetings, so we will have time to do this. We did go over basically your the introduction to that book. We have a few more minutes. If there's anything you'd like to say, just by way of, hello, or anything like that, I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, hello, everybody. Again, I'm sorry I didn't get to talk with you all. But one of the things I see that you're going to do with the book is actually read the Constitution as part, which is the center of the book, and I think that's extremely important. And so I'd like to be available in your future meetings when you discuss it, if you have questions about it and so on. I'm pretty familiar with it myself, and I'd be glad to discuss it with you and talk about it with you. So I don't know if the introductory part of the book is kind of an overview of world federalism, and I imagine many of you are pretty familiar with that history and so on. And it talks a little bit about how the Earth Constitution was created, and it gives some of that history, which I think is important. They broke away, coming out of the big 1950 movement in Geneva, where all these World Federalists came together, many of them, maybe 500 of them. There were three breakaways, three directions. Many of them went into trying to reform the United Nations. Largely, they failed on doing that, since here we are in 2021, and it's pretty much the same as it was. Some of them, one contingent went into trying to create the European Union. They were quite successful, right? They really transformed Europe in amazing ways since 1950. And another small group went into the project of creating an Earth Constitution, writing it. And the key to that group, I think, in my view, the most important point was Philip Isley and the people he worked with to create those constituent assemblies and eventually write the Constitution that came out in its final form in 1991. Anybody have any thoughts or responses?
Well, just as you came in, Glenn, we were going down a list of people, and we were about to do the last. I was talking, and then Lynn was going to say a word, and we have about 4 minutes until we were going to wrap up.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do then is I will skip over what I was going to say. I will allow Lynn to jump in if you have a sentence or two. Then I need to turn it over to Gail to wrap up today and verify the next meeting. So Lynn, if you can take up to a minute, you get the last word in the conversation.
The virus is the Earth Constitution. As Carla just said, vitamin D is going down. I haven't been to the doctor in 30 years, but I just had my bloods taken and my vitamin D is low. Well, guess what, people? The rest of the world is low on vitamin D because we're all indoors isolating, right? The virus is the Constitution. It teaches us what we should have known from the start, right? That we all need to live together and do it right. So it's fascinating that you brought that up, Carla, because I'm taking lots of vitamin D, but shouldn't I just go outside?
Great.
Right?
Okay. Well, thank you, Lynn. As you might imagine, Glenn, we had lots of different themes going on at once in the last hour and a half. So I want to, Simon, I see your hand. Can you say what you want to say in a sentence or two?
Yes. Contact information for Glen Martin, please. Email, telephone, cell phone, if you could share with us.
Yes, be glad to. I'm looking for the chat more.
Okay, on the bottom, it should say bottom of the screen. Do you see the chat? just near the center?
Yeah,
Donna, can you dupe this out on a send, on an email send to all of us?
if I had
What-
your email list, I could do that.
You know what, we're going to send out
I
a
can do
mailing
that.
anyway. We can do it after this.
I
We
can
don't
do
have to
that.
do it right now. Yeah, we'll do it at the next, yeah, thank you. So, okay, well, in that case, I will turn it over to to Gail. I'll say thank you all for coming. We have our usual faithful group and one new person. Brad, we didn't get to hear from you. Hopefully next time. And Gail, you could wrap us up.
Yes. Hi, Glenn. I'm Gail Hughes, the coordinator of the book
Gail.
club. I am the one who sent you the email message. So glad that you were able to join us at the end so that at least we can say hi.
Yeah.
The next meeting will be, we regularly meet the second Saturday of each month. So that would be Saturday, February 13, which is the second Saturday of February, from noon to 1:30 Eastern time. So if you're not in Eastern time, you need to, figure out what time that would be for
Where are
you.
you, Glenn?
And
I'm in Virginia. I'm in Eastern time.
okay, Eastern time then. So you're noon to 1:30. And our plan is to discuss Articles 1 through 9 of the Constitution. So
Okay.
that's our next session.
Great. So with that, did you have any other announcements, Gail?
No, that should do it.
Okay, well then I'll end where I began. Happy New Year. Hopefully next month at this time, we'll still have a country and it will be a better one. So we'll proceed from there. So I'll invite Gail to stay on and have a great month, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bob, I have a quick question for you. The people that had
Sure.
their passports taken away, what was that situation called? That was very interesting.
Well,
Where
they were
having a
going,
meeting.
yeah, they were going to a meeting of the World Constitution and Parliament Association, which, Glenn will talk about in detail next time. And I think they were having what did they call that? A provisional parliament meeting in Libya, if I remember correctly.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
Glenn will talk about all that.
When,
Then they, say again?
when?
Oh, that's in the first chapter. I don't remember
No, I
the.
mean, when was this meeting to have taken place in Libya?
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's mentioned in the introduction of the book. I don't remember the date.
Huh.
Yeah, that I don't remember. But it is in the introduction, and I could even tell you what page it's on. I did make a note of that. Yeah, page 17, where they talk about the superpowers manipulating and subverting the meeting. And since then, since then they've had to change their strategy. So that's on page 17 in the introduction.
And then were you going to say something else about that?
No, that was it. I was just going to have a debriefing meeting with Gail.
And then who was the person that brought up the cantons in Switzerland and they're every 2 weeks that they meet?
Oh, yeah, that's Tom Hastings, the fellow who's
Still
there now. Oh, I will shut the recording.
That was
Thank
excellent.
you. Then I'll go. So I'll leave.
That was excellent. Thanks so much for bringing that up, Tom.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah.
You should follow up on that.